Yo, everybody. Welcome to Off Panel, a weekly interview podcast about all things comics. I'm your host, David Harper, and this week's guest is the artist of comics like The Unbeatable Squirrel Girl, Jughead, and the upcoming Assassination at Skybound. It's Erica Henderson. Thanks for coming on, Erica.
Hi, thanks. Sorry to step on your lines there.
No, it's okay. It's funny. I've thought about changing my intro because like 1 in every 5 times that happens. And I'm like, I know why they're jumping in. I've set it up for them to jump in, but no, it's fine.
But if I don't, then like half the time there's that awkward pause and I'm like, oh, okay, I should jump in now.
And now I'm just sad and I feel like Erica doesn't like me because there's this awkward pause. Well, I want to have you on because Assassination comes out March 13th. It's actually on FOC the day this drops. It's a great book, but before we go there, I want to talk about your art and kind of how you got to Assassination. And I want to start with like your school because you studied film and animation in school, and I think that's really interesting. Like, how does that affect your approach with art in general? Like, does that enter into your brain in like a subconscious way when you're working?
I think, honestly, I'm not sure how much my schooling helped because I feel like all the teachers I had were along the lines of like, you should really feel what's there. And I'm like, I just want to learn about how this camera works. And like, it never happened. Mm-hmm. But I don't know how the camera works. But I do think a lot about film and storytelling. And I think being in that environment made me realize I didn't actually want to work in film, but that I enjoyed storytelling. Mm. And that's where comics comes in, and that was like made me realize why I wasn't as interested in illustration either. It's not the same thing.
In the sense that it's illustrations less like storytelling and it's more just like graphic. It's more like a single piece. With
illustration, it's more that you're visually expressing a piece of a story. Mm. But with comics, you're actually telling what's happening. Mm-hmm. Like you have to do a lot of the work to express what's going on because the words are generally just dialogue. So mm-hmm. you have to explain what the emotions are, where you are, etc.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the funny thing about your art. I mean, it's not really that it's not that funny of a thing, but I mean, it's just like when I think about your art, it really is storytelling is like the first word that comes into my brain is because like I don't know. I mean, you just have you have an incredible ability to like both do visual humor but also convey what's happening in a story, and I think that is like there's a lot of people who are good at like pinups and things like that. And there's some people who are really good at, other things, but it's like, I think really when it comes down to it, comic books are such a visual, like a visual storytelling medium that you have to have that part down. And like, that's the part that really feels like you have grasped more above all. And I don't know, I guess like that was part of the reason why I was interested about like the film background, because it seems like, I don't know, it just seems like that was something that perhaps had origins in that, but have you always had interest in like when you're drawing and everything like that, even before you're in comics, like the storytelling aspect of it?
Yeah, like I have a harder time with things like pinups because I find them very boring. Because it's just someone standing there or sitting there or I don't know, lounging seductively.
Yeah.
And even when it's something seductive, like I want to know what's going on.
Sure.
I'm more interested in why this is happening than the fact that there's something there.
Mm-hmm. How does that impact commissions for you?
It takes me a little while longer because I try to figure out what's happening.
Sure.
Because yeah, I have a hard time with just like, here's a person leaping. And they might do that, but like I just need to think about what's happening in the moment.
Yeah.
And I actually find it easier when someone wants me to draw two people. So it's like,
Mm.
okay, they're gonna do a thing. Like that gives you something to play with. Or if there's like, I want this character with my dog, and I'm like, cool. The dog is something that we can play with.
Yeah. It's funny. I actually got a commission from you at Emerald City last year. I had a theme sketchbook that was superheroes doing ordinary things, and you did a Jubilee shopping commission for me, and it's really great. It's her trying on clothes, and it has a. My favorite touch was the bag that she had. Was it H&M?
House of M?
It was House of
Oh no.
M. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like that was such a nice touch. I was just like, oh man, that is like such a little clever bit of storytelling that like I feel like some people might gloss over if it was in a comic, but it was such a nice touch.
I also enjoy puns. Yeah, whenever we have storefronts and things like that, that was really fun in Squirrel Girl to just like I would just look up lists of like, oh, what are some Marvel storylines and just look them up and like see which ones were usable puns.
That's amazing. Do you like this seems like that would lead to you liking The Good Place. Do you watch The Good Place?
I love The Good Place.
It's so good. But I mean, like
And I
all the
listened to the Good Place
storefronts.
podcast.
Oh, somebody told me about that. I've never listened to it.
It's good because it's not just them talking about the episodes. They actually invite on people from literally any aspect of the show to talk about what filmmaking and TV production is like.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the other part. Like, I don't need someone to recap the show. Like, I've already seen it.
Right.
But I am interested to find out, like, where you get props.
Mm-hmm. Or like, how do you come up with a list of like, chowder shops and yogurt shops and all the other places? Oh my God.
Yeah.
I love the different names they come up with. It's so staggering.
Have you seen Megan Amram's list of shops?
I have. It's very,
So
very
good.
good. Yeah, no, because I remember there was that episode where they just were like resetting. It was, I think, second season, and they just kept resetting over and over and over because they kept figuring it out. And they showed all the storefronts, and I was like, this is such like it was so fast you couldn't see all the details, but it was one of those things that was like perfect for the internet because the internet, of course, instantaneously screen caps all of them, and then you can go and read all the different things. I'm like, the creativity on that show is like staggering.
It's amazing how much detail you have to have in things like that when you're trying to build a realistic world.
Mm-hmm.
When I was in college, I interned on the Underdog movie.
Nice.
In the set dressing department. And there's a scene where Underdog first gets his powers and he like blows through an office building. And basically they like shot a dog puppet out of a cannon through, like an office. And all these papers fly everywhere. And the amount of paperwork we had to like kind of convincingly fill out and Xerox and make look real for this one shot of a dog like flying through.
Right.
It's insane.
That's amazing. Just in case like somebody happens to notice the details, they're like, wait a second, that paper is blank.
Right. And we had to have like, it had to be like certain like Office Max colors as well. So we had to hit up like every Office Max in the state of Rhode Island, which is not a lot. It's a very small state.
Oh my God, that's amazing. Well, so you also, I do want to talk about what you were doing before you got into comics, because you worked in video games, right? That's kind of where your career started, more or less.
Yeah.
What did you do exactly?
All right. So my first job out of school was at Harmonix on Rock Band.
Oh, nice.
And I was in the media department, which it was an odd section of the art department. So mostly what I worked on was actually weekly DLC trailers. So like every week there'd be new DLC, and depending on how many packs there were, so many trailers had to go out each week. And so I had to like record gameplay and then edit together music and like a little 1-minute trailer for each one of these.
Mm-hmm.
And outside of like a little bit of Photoshop touch-ups and things, that was about it.
Mm-hmm.
Did that for a while. And then I started working at a startup that after about 10 months of my being there got bought up by Zynga. And then I actually was doing in-game art, but it was like sprites and things
Hmm.
and lots of like isometric pieces we can, drop onto a little plane.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah, I mean, I was kind of curious if like that part. Oh my God, I have this thing where some of my listeners actually make fun of me for saying I'm kind of curious a lot, and I realized in that moment that I said it, that's the first time I've ever done that. I'm like, thanks,
Are
listeners,
you
you've ruined
curious?
me. I am curious. It's an authentic thing I say. I've ruined myself now, though.
Be true to yourself.
I know.
You're genuinely curious.
I'm kind of curious, at least. But anyways, but I mean, I was gonna ask about video games and whether or not that impacted your art. But I mean, it seems like that part of your career probably didn't at all. But were you a gamer before you got into that?
I don't do a lot of gaming because even then I was trying to do work on the side. So when
Okay,
you're working a full day and then going home and doing more drawing, there's barely any time to play games.
sure.
So there's like a select number of games that I'll get into,
Hmm.
and it's never like AAA games. It's gonna be like a constant thread, but I really like story-based games.
Sure, sure.
One, because they're done faster, and I can just play a game and be done with it. Because I've gotten into some bigger games, and then I'll have to go do something, and then like a month later, I don't know what that story was,
Right, right. Yeah.
and I don't know what's going on. Who's that guy? Why is he mad?
Honestly, I'm right there with you because I grew up playing like Final Fantasy games, and they were like, very story based, and I always kind of looked at them more of as a narrative. But when I've grown up and everything, I often don't. If I look back at how much time I spent like playing like Final Fantasy 6, where it would like cap out at 99.99 and it wouldn't count time anymore, I'm like, I don't even want to know how many hours I spent on that. I don't have that anymore. So like a game I really loved in recent years was like Firewatch, which was like 4 hours or something like that. And it was just storytelling and it was story based. And I love that. That is like a perfect length of game for me. And I wish there were more games like that.
I really like Night in the Woods for more recent ones. My earlier love, like one of my favorite games, and it probably still is. I just haven't played it in a while. I think I've bought it 3 times. Is Grim Fandango.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, like things where you get to play a little bit, but also it's very creatively story based. I really enjoy. But I also love stuff like Firewatch where you're just experiencing the story.
Right, right. It was a very immersive experience. I have to admit, I got way too invested in all of those characters, and by the end, it like basically that Etta James song that plays at the end just got like scorched onto my soul. It's I don't know that game is really amazing. But for video games and for movies and for animation and everything like that. You said that you didn't really, when you were studying all that stuff, and it doesn't really sound like when you worked in it, you really learned much about the storytelling or the framing or anything like that. But do all of those things kind of enter into your mind at all when you're trying to place your camera in your art or when you're trying to like figure out a shot in comics at all?
A bit, but because comics, I've actually done a couple of talks about this now, so I can talk about. I finally figured it out. Comics are set up so differently. So like, there's some stuff I get from those other mediums, but like when you're setting up a page of comics, one, you're looking at several images that you have to read left to right, left to right,
Mm-hmm.
but also have to work as a single larger image. And it's so different than from how you set up something for a screen, because you generally, when you're looking at a screen, you want to keep the action in the same place. Like when you cut, you don't want someone's eye to go somewhere else because now you're just confusing people for no reason.
Right.
Like you don't want someone to not know what they're looking at. Unless if you are, you obscure with like darkness, you don't want to have them like literally not know where to look.
Right. Right.
Um, so it's in some ways, yes, and in some ways, the way it's set up doesn't translate. I started thinking about this a lot last year. I was invited to this animation festival in Mexico called Pixelotl,
Mm-hmm.
and like everyone who's a guest gives a talk.
Mm.
And I had a talk in mind. I don't even know what it was anymore. But after literally my first afternoon there, talking to all these animators and animation directors, I was like, oh, the way comics is set up is so different. Like I literally changed it into a talk about how all that stuff works in comics because I realized that like all these people working in animation think so differently.
Mm-hmm.
Because yeah, it's like you have to literally invent timing and motion on a static page, but where literally in order to take in that information, your eye is moving.
Mm-hmm.
So there's like you're moving and processing it, but the image is static and you have to like trick the brain into thinking that something's happening but still make it legible.
Right. Well, and then like the other interesting wrinkle to it too is like you're also relying on the reader reading it correctly. Like the pathing is done by the reader as opposed to by the animator or the director or whomever, which is kind of an interesting
Well, hopefully you can like force the reader down a certain path by how you lay things out.
Ideally, that is for sure. I mean, that is the interesting thing though is like if it is, you know, if it's like if the panel layout is done in slightly a strange way, it's like sometimes the reader will maybe read the first panel and then the third panel and then the second panel or 1, 2, 3 or whatever. It's like I don't know. I mean, it is really interesting because it's like there's a certain lack of control once it gets out of your hands in comics, which other mediums don't necessarily have. Maybe.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's still plenty of interpretation left in other ways
Sure.
for like film and books. I think, you know, either way, people are going to read things how they're going to read them.
That's true. So why ultimately comics? Like why did you decide to go freelance and start working in comics?
I when I was doing stuff on the side after work, I I think I knew that I was happier doing the freelance stuff, even if it was a lot more terrifying. Because you just don't know when work's going to come in than
Right.
at my regular job.
Mm-hmm.
But I was actually on this path where basically the art director was going to leave soon and I was going to be the art director and I had benefits and stuff. And I was like, well, I don't know if I can leave this. You know, I'm getting everything I need from this job.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, Andy Corey, who at the time was Comics Alliance's editor-in-chief and is now editor at Vertigo, at a New York Comic Con was like, so when are you going to make this shift? Because you're doing more and more in comics, but like that, you can't do both, really,
right,
if you're going to do full-time in comics. And then that Monday we got back to work and they closed the studio and I was like, all right, I guess I'm doing it.
Guess the decision was made for you.
Yeah, like the nice thing is, you know, you get a severance package. So I was like, all right, if I fail miserably, they've at least paid me for a couple of months.
Yeah, that's nice. So was this like Subatomic Party Girls era or so, or when was that?
Yeah, that was like one of the first things that I did. I think the first thing I did actually was some stuff with Atomic Robo.
Okay.
I did an issue and some coloring.
Mm-hmm.
And then, yeah, Subatomic Party Girl started up, and I was working on. I actually wound up getting a lot of freelance work at the millions of tiny video game studios in Boston area. Because you have like all these MIT kids graduating, and then they all have startups.
Nice. Well, you know, so one thing I was reading about when I was doing my research for this that I thought was really fascinating was the fact that so you originally, from what I understand, when you were working on Squirrel Girl, you were doing things all digitally, but then by the end of it, you were working purely traditionally. Is that true?
Pretty much. The first 3 issues of Squirrel Girl, except for the covers. So the first cover was digital. After that, the covers were traditional.
Mm-hmm.
No. Okay. So the first 4 issues of Squirrel Girl It's three. Well, first three issues, Squirrel Girl, entirely digital, and then after that, I started doing what I was doing with most of the covers, except for one, which was digital, which was drawing it on my computer, printing it out, inking it, and scanning it,
Mm-hmm.
because I liked working with actual ink.
Right.
And then after a while, I think it was because my printer was being a jerk, and I just said, "All right, I'm just going to I'm just going to draw these on paper now."
Mm-hmm.
Because I realized I wasn't actually, at a certain point, I'd become so comfortable with how that book works
Mm-hmm.
that I wasn't actually, when I was drawing it digitally, resizing anything or moving things around. I was like, I don't actually have to do this anymore.
Yeah.
Because that was really the main fears. I thought that I would have to keep changing things. And, I'd worked on that book for a long time, so I realized I could just draw on paper, which I kind of prefer in a lot of ways.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I do think that's one of the interesting opportunities that Squirrel Girl provided you is like a lot of artists these days don't get a prolonged run on a book. And you obviously did. I mean, to the point where you even did a graphic novel while you were making the rest of the comic.
Oh my
And
God, I keep forgetting about that.
but I mean, like you did so much over that period that it it I don't know. I mean, I'm interested in what like that afforded you as an artist. Like did that comfort level allow you it sounds like it gave you a bit of a shorthand and a confidence in what you were doing, but what did that provide you as an artist? Was there like a real opportunity or a real like advantage to being on a book for so long like that?
I mean, I think part of it is just you get such good practice
Sure.
because you're working constantly. And it was practice on everything, like the layouts and the drawing and the inking. And at certain times, I could start to focus on different parts of it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, like one of the nice things, like before we even started, I asked Ryan if he was cool with me changing stuff in the scripts, and he said yes. So a lot of times, like the layouts took a while because I was trying to like basically see the ways in which the script could be laid out like more dramatically
Mm-hmm.
with more like comic timing and just in a way that like read more clearly.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that was the first thing that I focused on. And after that, like I kind of knew what I was doing with those scripts. So I was like working on the drawing more, and then later it was the inking, and it was yeah, it just gave me time to play around with different parts of it.
Yeah. Yeah, I imagine like all that time kind of helps you refine and like I don't know if necessarily evolve the way you work, but like refine the way you work to like I don't know, achieve a real comfort level and like an understanding of how you want to approach the story for this character in this book overall.
Yeah, I had a lot of rules that like really only I knew about because it wasn't worth telling everyone because that was it was just me doing it.
What's an example? Did you have like a rule you could share?
Like one of the things was because the story took place in the 616 or whatever it is now, they've like changed all that. I don't know.
They changed the 616?
I don't like didn't they just combine all the universes after Secret Wars?
I don't know. I mean, like I
Yeah,
think
exactly. Nick
yeah,
knows.
yeah. Anyways, the rules. Sorry. That's an entirely different path I'm sure we could go down for forever.
Yeah, which is like I don't know what's going on.
Yeah.
Um I wanted certain things to be more real than I think a lot of people might want to go for a like YA slash all ages humor book.
Hmm.
So I would have there'd be times where like something would come in and they'd be like, I think to be more threatening, these bears should have their arms crossed. And I'm like, bears can't do that. That is not what bears do.
Yeah.
Or I never one of the things I really, really fought against was putting like squirrel and nut stuff everywhere.
Oh.
So like someone who has a thing they really like, they aren't necessarily going to wear it on all of their clothes.
Right.
Like, if anything, it's something that, like, all your relatives give you, and you, like, have this one awkward cabinet.
Yeah. Yes. I know that way too well.
But, like, not everything you own is going to have that. So I, like, really steered away from, like, squirrel mugs and, like, acorn shirts and acorn jewelry when it was Doreen.
Mm-hmm.
And, yeah, like, I always wanted her costumes to work in ways that, like, athletic clothes would work. So the first one, like, the belt was around her waist
Mm-hmm.
so that you can, like, move your hips, because if your belt's on your hips and, like, either they're restricted or, like, it's gonna fall off.
Mm-hmm.
um and, like, the second one that had the little skirt was actually based on, like, tennis dresses, which I thought was really cool.
Yeah.
I walked into an Adidas store, and it was, like, during Wimbledon or something, and they had all these tennis dresses, and I was like, oh my god, they make dresses for sports. Because I don't care about tennis.
Sure, sure.
I don't think about tennis.
That was a fortuitous, experience of going into that store.
Yeah, like, we had talked a lot about changing the costume all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Just because, like, why not?
Yeah, yeah. It is. I do love the idea that, because I think if like earlier in Squirrel Girl appearances, she would often, like, she'd have like acorn earrings and things like that, and not that there's anything wrong with that, but personally, I totally agree with what you're saying. It's like, if a person loves something, they're not necessarily going to be about it all the time. Also, sometimes people get or preconceived notions about what people like, and that may not be accurate. For some reason, my family was convinced for like a solid 5-year period that I loved elephants, and I have no problem with elephants, but they got me like elephant everything for like 5 years. I'm like, what is happening? How did this happen? It's nonsense. But yeah, so like, I like that move. That's a good one.
And it's also, like, I just sort of like the idea that, I mean, one, you can only buy as much stuff as you have access to, and there's only so many, like, squirrel outfits out
Sure.
there.
Yeah, yeah. Unless she's making
But
her own stuff.
yeah, and I just don't see someone who's, like, going to college full time and also superheroing, like, going down to Joann's, like, finding a squirrel fabric so they could, like, make their own dress.
Right, right. Well, as far as visual humor is concerned, I think it's a really interesting thing that you do really well, because it's like visual humor. I feel like there's like a really fine line. Like, you can either try too hard with it and it just doesn't work, or you don't convey it enough and it just doesn't work. How do you, like, what do you think is, like, I don't know, this sounds dramatic, but like the secret to making like visual comedy work on the page? Like, how do you convey that?
I don't know. I think for me, I really feel it out.
Sure.
Um, like, yeah, I find that I get very invested in the moments,
Mm-hmm.
like the moments that are more heightened for whatever reason, like comedy or sadness or someone being angry. Like, you really have to feel it at that time. Like, there's that part at the end of the graphic novel when, like, you're not sure if Tippy Toes died, and it's like, I, like, was trying not to cry the whole time I was drawing it, because I had
Right.
to, like, be in that scene, and I was like, this is very hard. This is very hard to do on many levels.
Mm-hmm.
um but yeah, I think it's like, in college, they weren't real classes, but, like, I did some, like, improv stuff just to, like, learn how to do it.
Mm-hmm.
Like, we didn't give performances or anything. It was just, this is a good skill to know.
Right. And I do think that, like, to a certain degree, I don't know. I mean, that's one of the things I think comics can be really good about, is like the paneling and like the storytelling element, because there is like an actual timing element. You can really hit some of these comedic beats really well. Like, I don't remember the details totally, but in the very first issue you two did, I remember there was a moment where she like drops on Craven and she's like, "You're the one who sucks," and there was something about that moment, the way you like hit that visually, that just immediately made me laugh out loud. And I'm gonna be honest, like, in the beginning, I wasn't sure if I wanted or needed a Squirrel Girl book, because she was always kind of perceived as, a joke. And like what you two did with her, and Rico and everybody else did with her, like really made it a comic that was worthwhile and made Doreen an essential character. But at the same time, like at that point, I was questionable. I was dubious of it. But
Yeah, that's fair.
There was something about it that, like, I don't know, like the way that you and Ryan were able to nail these comedic beats just like instantaneously like connected me with the book. And it was funny how like just this joke beat was what did that for me. But I don't know. I think that's when people are really good at visual humor. Like somebody I think is really great about it is Steve Lieber.
Oh, yeah.
Like Superior Foes of Spider-Man. Like that whole book is just loaded with hilarious bits. And
He's so good at like the pantomime. Like,
exactly. Yeah.
That's like really where he excels, is like those like quiet visual jokes.
Did you see that thing on Twitter recently that he posted where
Yes.
the Nick Spencer is just like, I don't know, do something funny with the wings, and like he does this whole full page bit of like Mach 5 trying to leave the store. I mean, it's amazing. And like that's tough.
It's so good. Yeah, I love that it's just make a joke. That's the whole page, is make a joke.
My God, Nick Spencer wrote the hell out of that scene. And now, a word from our sponsor. Yo, everybody. I'd like to take a minute to talk about our sponsors over at Impact Theory Comics. Impact Theory Comics is a new independent publisher, and they're releasing their first comic, Neon Future. Neon Future is a collaboration with world-famous DJ and producer Steve Aoki, and is written by the Eisner Award-winning writer of Justice, Jim Kruger, with artists Neil Edwards of Fantastic Four fame and Jeremy Rappak delivering the visuals and building the world. Want a first look at the book and Neil and Jeremy's art? Give Impact Theory a follow on Instagram at @ITComics. If you like what you see and you're a fan of science fiction, this might be the comic for you. So head over to your local comic book shop and get Neon Future #1 on your pull list ASAP. And now, back to the show. I want to ask about one of I think the most mysterious elements about your work is how the hell you do all of it, because you in like 3 years, near, like, from what I read, you did about 1,000 pages of Squirrel Girl on the book and on the graphic novel. You also did Jughead during that time. You were doing a lot of covers. How do you balance that? Are you just like unbelievably fast, or what is that? How do you do that?
I don't know. I feel like that was a mistake.
You just like blacked out and you're like, what happened? 3 years later.
Yeah, 3 years later, here I am. Catch me up. How was 2016?
You're just chained to a desk somewhere, drawing relentlessly.
Yeah, it was just a lot of work.
Right.
Basically, when Jughead came around, it was one of those things where I think I knew it was a bad idea when I said yes. Like, a bad idea for me physically. But Jughead's my favorite character from the Archie series as a kid.
Mm-hmm.
And when they were telling me about it, I was really on the fence. I was gonna say no, but I figured I would ask who was gonna write it.
Ah.
At least said it was Chip. And like, well, I can't say no now.
Yeah.
And I found out that Jughead was also Chip's favorite, so it was kind of perfect.
Yeah. Yeah, that was a great. I mean, you guys, God, you had a very prolific time in the Eisners, I think. I mean, because the Jughead one, was it Humor Publication?
Yeah, Jughead one for humor and Squirrel Girl for teen.
Right. Yeah. I love that book. I mean, it was. I guess, was it technically a Time Police issue that you guys did?
Yeah.
Okay, that issue was like.
He wanted to do.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, because he wanted to do a sci-fi issue.
Mm-hmm.
And at first, because like Fury Road had just come out, I started just doodling some Fury Road designs of the characters. And then I was like, wait, there's already a sci-fi Jughead thing, but apparently it was right after Chip's time reading Jughead.
Oh, okay.
But it was like right during my time reading Jughead.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah,
Chip's old.
That was I love that issue, but I don't know if you saw it. Well, actually, I'm sure you did. Like, it's so funny. It's like you and Derek seemingly are like always around each other. It's like Derek was doing Jughead, now he's doing the Jughead Time Police, and also I don't know if he's still doing Squirrel Girl during that, but
He's still doing Squirrel Girl.
He is? Man, apparently Squirrel Girl is blessed with the most prolific artist you can possibly find. Because I remember there was the Nightmare issue where you did like the end caps. You did like the first part and the last part. Did you have any fill-ins besides that?
No, and that one actually wasn't designed to be a fill-in.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it actually, Ryan had already, because we always do a one-shot at the end of an arc.
Mm-hmm.
And so Ryan had written that one. It was because Ryan loves Spider-Man villains.
Sure.
And it hit right around when I was working on the graphic novel, and I said, wait a second, anytime we have something happening that's not in real life, we have someone else draw it. Let's have someone else draw this because I'm actually dying right now. And then I just drew that one panel of Squirrel Girl when she woke up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, it worked out quite nice. I don't, who did the art on that issue? I'm trying to remember.
That was Jacob Shabbat.
Oh, he was great. That was just a fantastic.
I love Jacob. Yeah, he's great.
Yeah, that was really, really good. Well, last question before Assassination. I did want to ask, like, I know you've talked about it a bit, but why did you decide it was time to move on from Squirrel Girl, and like, why did you stick around on covers as well?
Basically, it had been 3 years and I just needed to do other things.
Sure.
But I don't dislike Squirrel Girl or the team. And so staying on to do covers was great. I think they suggested it and I said yes. Mm-hmm. And that's really all there was there.
Yeah.
Like I just need to work on other things and I want to do covers.
Yeah.
That's the whole story.
well, let's move on to that other thing. I'm going to do a spiel about Assassination. So this is what this book is about. It's Erica's new book with Kyle Starks writing and Darren Bennett lettering. And the first issue solicit says the world's former greatest hitman hires the 20 best assassins in the world to be his bodyguards. These mean as hell hired guns and murderers must work together to keep the new crime boss safe while attempting to solve the mystery of who's trying to off him. I love it. I read the first issue. It is fantastic. I love like 80s, 90s action movies. And so this is pretty much exactly up my alley, down to the fact that one of the characters has a golden, like, I don't know, Desert Eagle with revenge written on it. It's extremely amazing.
Yes. that was a detail that like Kyle had in the script.
Oh, really?
It was like golden Desert Eagle with the word revenge on it.
It was very Nicolas Cage and Face Off, which I really appreciated.
Oh my God.
Yeah, it's fantastic. But, speaking about you moving on, it's like after doing Squirrel Girl for 3 years and doing so much in the terms of like non-violent solutions, did you have like a desire to kind of almost do like a rated R book in a way?
This actually wasn't in reaction to Squirrel Girl.
No.
Kyle and I have been wanting to work together for a long time, and this is basically what Kyle does. If you've read other Kyle Starks
Sex Castle,
books.
Kill Them All, yeah.
Yeah. And we were actually talking about this book when I thought I was still going to be doing Squirrel Girl for a while longer. And when I left, it was like, okay, well, this is it. We're going to be doing it. And we had actually already been talking to John Moisen, who's our editor on the book.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I think it has been nice to do things that feel different, because Jughead and Squirrel Girl are kind of on that same level,
right?
Of like teen humor.
Mm-hmm.
I guess Squirrel Girl's 20 now, so no longer a teen.
But like, it's teen friendly humor, or like humor that's not like doesn't involve lots of gunplay, I guess. That is for sure.
Yeah, friendly humor.
So you and Kyle have been friends for a long time. Did you guys bond over your mutual love of Tremors?
Oh, I'm sure we did. Like we bonded. I don't remember what made us friends, but we just get along really well.
Yeah.
Our love of Tremors definitely helps.
It is a rare love, but it is a good love to share. I love the fact that you apparently don't just love the first Tremors, you love all of the Tremors.
Until Netflix,
Until Netflix, right?
which is when it left the original production
Mm.
house. So you had different people working on it, but it was the same group for the first four movies and the TV series on Sci-Fi.
I completely forgot that there was a sci-fi series. That's kind of amazing.
Yeah, because Kyle and I are the only people who own those DVDs. They printed 1,000, and we own two of them, and all the other ones, I don't know where they went.
This is a super random Tremors aside, but I was playing a video game recently. It was a PlayStation 4 game called Horizon Zero Dawn. And there is a thing you have to fight in it that is called a rock breaker, and it's effectively like one of the Tremors worms, and except for it's mechanical. And it was funny because I kept getting my ass kicked by it, and I realized in my head I was like, I need to stand on rocks. I need to stand on rocks and just shoot arrows from a distance. I'm like, thank you, Tremors. You have totally saved me from this. It was Tremors, like Kevin Bacon, Fred Ward. You guys saved me. It's incredible.
You did it.
So when you and Kyle wanted to work together, you didn't necessarily know what you had in mind, I guess. But how did this book develop originally between the two of you?
I think because we didn't actually have a real start date, there was just a long time. And by a long time, I mean like months, maybe a year.
Yeah.
Where we would just kind of say, hey, if we worked on something, what would it be?
Right.
And we had actually talked about a different idea that I think I'm going to hold on to.
Sure.
Because Kyle said that I could have it because what I was talking about, like, took him into places that he was not comfortable writing.
Mm-hmm.
And then we lost that. Like, we just kept trying to figure it out. And at one point, Kyle said he has an idea, and it's about assassins.
Mm-hmm.
And he had the very basic shell of the outline, like basically what you just said,
mm-hmm.
where there's someone who needs to hide all these assassins, but then also what the very basic ending would be.
Sure.
And so we kind of just talked about it a lot and filled it in from there.
Mm-hmm. Did the two of you, have any particular inspirations for this, or was this mostly just like basically your brain was infused with so many like insane action movies that you could kind of just riff on it?
Probably more the latter. Although I think at the time when we first started, Kyle had watched like as many Hong Kong gangster films
Sure.
as he could. Not for research, just because that was what his thing was at that moment.
Yeah. His life has just basically led up to doing Sex Castle, Kill Them All, and Assassin Nation because that's just what he enjoys. Yeah,
I think when he was first putting it together in his head, like every single person in the book was Chinese because that was just like what he was seeing. Like that was like what he was in the middle of.
That's awesome. Well, I'm interested in how you two work because Kyle obviously is a cartoonist himself. I mean, he does things like Rock Candy Mountain, Sex Castle, Kill Them All, etc., etc. Do you feel that like the way you two work with him scripting and you drawing and everything like that, like does he approach it? Does it feel like he approaches things at all differently, or do you talk differently with each other because you both are artists as well?
I feel like we both actually, when we're talking about visuals, come at it from a film perspective. Because, yeah, like you said, a lot of this is based around those like 80s, 90s action movies, and a lot of our inspiration comes from those kind of moments.
Mm-hmm.
We actually don't talk too much about how it's going to play out on the page unless we're trying to like figure out literally what's going to happen in a scene.
Right. Because
I think at this point, we've been friends for a long time. We know each other's work. We just trust each other.
Mm-hmm.
Like there are certain things that don't need to be said because we've been friends for like 7 years or something like that.
And you're coloring yourself on this, right?
Yeah.
So how does that change things? Because I thought one of the interesting things that you did in this was there was a lot of panels where you use like solid colors to really like call out the person in the foreground and everything like that. And it was a really nice touch. And there was like, the color choices were fantastic. But why, like, first off, why did you decide to color yourself? And second off, like, what's your approach on that?
Well, one of the things, okay, so I just like coloring myself.
Sure.
And actually, like a lot of artists I know, if time were not an issue, like
Right.
we've talked about it, like we just love to color ourselves. But if you're working on like a big two book, there's just no time for it.
Right. Right.
And I have a little more time to work on this. And so what I'm looking at is I'm actually pulling up the first issue now to look at it because it's been a few months.
Hmm.
Um,
Are you done with the whole book?
no, I'm working on issue 4 right now.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Basically, I want each particular space to feel different. I think it comes out a little more in later issues because the first book is mostly in one room.
Hmm.
But yeah, like I like using color to emphasize emotions
Sure.
because we're not, I think the nice thing about comics versus film and even animation is that when you have something moving in front of you in real time and talking, it's tied a little more to the real world.
Hmm.
Like if something visually gets really weird, that's generally a signal that things have just gotten weird.
Right. Right.
Like things are wrong now.
Hmm.
But with comics, there's a little more leeway because you're not dealing in like a physical moving world. So I think you can play around a little more and no one questions it.
Hmm. Does that change your approach on your line art at all? Like when you're coloring yourself?
No.
No. It did feel like in some ways there was like some interesting, like, I don't know, shading things that you were doing in this issue that did feel a little bit different than Squirrel Girl. Did you have a slightly different approach because of the story, or is it much the same and I'm just looking into things too much?
There were a couple of things I did a little bit different just to try them out. I think I used more like heavy black shadows, but that's because there are more times here where I think things are emphasized.
Sure.
Like you want things to be emphasized in that kind of way.
Hmm. So I want to talk about the cast. I know I'm sure that you guys, I don't know if it was you or if it was Kyle or if it was both of you that named the whole cast, but you had the was that did you guys just have like basically a text chain just going back and forth that, or how did that work out?
Okay, so there are certain characters that we knew had to be in there.
Hmm.
And those are the ones that'll kind of keep going on. I won't say who they are.
Right.
Um, and then at other times, you'd want like there were just things that like we thought would be fun, even and even with the characters that like are supposed to be there the whole time. Like what as we figure out who they are and like what they're doing and what their thing is,
Hmm.
there was a lot of I was a lot of back and forth there. So there were times where I was just drawing people,
Hmm.
and then I would say, "Oh, this person would fit here in this character we've already figured out," basically.
Right.
Or Kyle will say, like, "Here's this mobster that exists in real life. We should just use him." um, yeah, it was like a lot, like with Connie.
Hmm.
That was one that I had to have in there because like I drew her and I was like, okay, we have to name her Connie because that's just like one of those names that Asian girls have. Like it's just an Asian girl in America name.
Yeah.
And it was funny because like every time that character comes up, there's always someone who's like, yeah, I have 10 cousins named Connie.
I love it. My favorite name is probably Desert Regal, just
Oh,
because,
so good.
yeah,
So good.
there's levels to it that I really appreciate. It's fantastic. But you have, the main character, Boss Rankin, Chekhov's gun, which is just a staggeringly great joke. And then you have 20 assassins. I mean, that's a
So
lot.
many people.
It's a lot to deal with. Like, how do you distinguish the cast from one another visually? Just because like you have to come up with distinguishable looks because these are assassins, like they're inherently
Right.
stylized people.
Well, and also even without that, you don't want 20 people to look the same.
No,
Like
of
that's
course not.
just even if they were just, if you're doing like uh 12 angry men, it's just people in a room, like you need them to look different.
Yeah, yeah.
Um so part of it was just one of the tricks that I use is I'll find an actor
Mm.
and I'll do one drawing of them based on a photo, and then I'll do drawings based on the drawing, and then just keep drawing from that. So it's like this is no longer a Eminem in Wanted situation
Right.
where anyone's going to get mad about it.
Yeah.
But now they all look different, but
Hmm.
you don't necessarily know who the actor is.
Hmm. I was reading an interview with you that I think it was the Image interview you and Kyle did, and I think it was the only time in a comic book interview I've seen CCH Pounder referenced.
but she's Amanda Waller.
CCH Pounder is amazing. She's a great actress, but it was just like I remember seeing that. I was just like, wow, okay. I mean, like Lance Henriksen. I'm sure that's come up with something involving
He
aliens.
has to have.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
he's too nerd adjacent. Like CCH Pounder. That's an entirely different story. But yeah, I do think that I don't know. It seems when you're reading the comic, like you can tell that you and Kyle are having a lot of fun, and I think that's part of the reason why it just works so well. Is like you look at the characters, and it just seems like each character is like this little treasure, even if they aren't necessarily all destined to last forever. They have their own thing going on, and I love it. Like I mentioned earlier, like there's a golden gun that has revenge written on it, and that is such a nice little touch, and it's I don't know, I love it. It's fantastic.
Yeah, no, the character creation was really fun. It was just, but also just trying to figure out like how all these people would dress
Right.
was fun. Because one of the hard things for me is I really like cool fashion stuff, but that also conflicts with my desire to make things feel a little more real.
Hmm.
And a lot of people don't dress good.
Well, and I imagine that you have a room full of like insane assassins and everything like that. They're probably the type of people who have just enough irrational confidence to wear stupid stuff.
I also just like the idea like there's people who maybe they probably, if you're an assassin, you probably didn't have a lot of money to begin with,
Hmm.
but now you do have money.
Right.
So what do you buy?
Right. Exactly.
Like you're not someone who was raised with class.
Yeah. I like Wistful Stan is kind of a very interesting. He's like a sad character, but also he's just like the bum assassin. There's not like actual bum, but he's just like the guy that's kind of like busted. And there was something very interesting about him in terms of the contrast. Whoa.
I love Wistful Stan. Oh, what happened?
I just threw my phone accidentally. I was looking at the picture of all the characters, and I was like looking through them, and I was just like, "Oh, Wistful Stan, so wistful."
I love Wistful Stan. I love so many of these characters.
They're really great. Well, I do have to ask about the one that's probably the strangest for you. So your significant other Dave is actually a character in the book. I read that you initially requested that he like the name changes. How did it end up being that he ended up being a character in the book? After all,
Kyle never changed the name.
okay,
I assumed he just
didn't do
forgot.
it.
And at that point, I was like, I guess we're doing this.
Yeah.
Because I feel like at a certain point, I don't want to just draw a different Dave.
Yeah.
And they're the character is basically like his whole thing is that he's such a regular guy.
Yeah.
And what, now I have to draw like a different, very regular white guy who's like obviously the features are going to be simplified because we're cartooning and like make it not my Dave, and I'm like, just make it Dave.
Did you make him pose?
No. I know what he looks like.
Oh. He really reminds me of Sam Rockwell's character in Galaxy Quest.
Oh my god.
Yeah, like
Guy?
yeah, exactly, Guy Fleegman, where he's just like I love the part where he's God, I think they're on the ship, and he's just like, I'm just happy to be on the show, man. And it's just like, like, really? Like, yeah, just imagine Dave being like that. Cause there's one part in the issue, I don't consider this a spoiler, where he says, I think basically it's lit because like something's happening that is quite lit, so to speak. And, it's just like, there's like an enthusiast. He's just like really enjoys being a part of this insanity. And
he's just happy to be there.
He's just happy to be there. Just happy to be a part of the show. And it makes him a very charming character.
And that is something that real Dave is still mad about, that like this character that looks like him and has his name says lit.
That is, I don't know why that's a word I've never been comfortable using. I feel like I'm just old enough where I'm just like, I don't feel like I can use this appropriately in spoken word. It just seems awkward coming out of my mouth.
Yeah, at a certain age, that just becomes one of those words where it sounds like you're trying to get kids to get off drugs. It just makes you seem older.
Yeah, don't do drugs. They're not lit. I'm like, you can't do that. That just doesn't work.
Like, you have to actually have, like, turned a chair around and be sitting backwards in it and talking to, like, a room of, like, 16, like, at-risk youths.
I do love that you all actually did interviews from their perspectives, because that was a really nice touch, because A, it means that you don't have to answer the same questions over and over, and B, it also allowed you to, I don't know, get into these characters. Like Dave did an interview, which is pretty hilarious. Did you and Kyle answer those, or did Dave actually answer those?
All Kyle.
Okay.
That was entirely Kyle. Like, I didn't even know they had happened until they came out.
Yeah, I just saw them coming up, and I was like, wait, they're interviews with the cast? I don't think I've seen this before, but I like it. It's good.
I think I might have seen the first email about it, but I wasn't involved, so I just didn't read it, because I don't have time to read stuff I'm not part of. I'm too busy drawing all these comics.
But I mean, the part of the reason why those interviews really work, though, is you can't, in a way, really talk about what happens in the book, because to talk about it basically would be to ruin the book in some ways. It's like an interestingly difficult book to talk about, besides the basic premise, which helps because the basic premise is amazing.
Right, because we can't even talk about what characters will be an issue 2.
Right, exactly. Yeah. I mean, it could be all of them. It could be none of them. I don't know. Read the issue to find out. Is it, last real question about it. Is it an ongoing or a mini?
It's a mini.
It's a mini. Okay. I do want to ask a question related to something you've been enjoying quite a bit lately. Which Deep Space Nine cast member would be the best assassin turned bodyguard if Worf was off the table?
If Worf was off the table?
Yeah.
We just got Worf. I mean, I feel like clearly Odo.
Yeah.
Because he could just slide under your door, be like a glass of water, and then you'd be dead.
Yeah, exactly.
Actually, I was thinking about that episode of Misfits with the guy who can control milk, and he's making people choke to death.
I do not know about that, but that is now my greatest nightmare, because I love milk. That's horrible.
Yeah, he could control dairy, rather. So if someone ate, like, cheese or milk, he could move it around in their insides and kill them. So I was thinking, like, if you drank Odo, he could just expand and kill you.
Wait, so that Misfits guy is basically like Dairy Magneto?
Basically.
That's amazing. That is one hell of a power set. That is incredible.
It's amazing. That's like the scariest episode of the show.
Yeah.
And it's the guy with stupidest power.
I do kind of feel like Quark has probably at least hired somebody to be killed.
Sure, but that's different.
Yeah, it is different.
He's a client.
Yeah, he's the client at that point. So one other DS9 question. So I have a long-standing connection to that, because when I was a kid, they would show it on Saturdays at 10 o'clock up here in Anchorage on like the NBC affiliate. And the funny thing is like my parents had a rule where basically like the 10 o'clock or 10:30 show would be like the last thing I could do before going to bed. So I have like a disproportionate amount of love for Cheers, Seinfeld, and Deep Space Nine. So it is like number one in my heart of hearts in the Star Trek zone. Where does it rank for you personally?
Well, I'm really enjoying it. I know that I must have watched it when it was on when I was a kid. No, I know I watched it because there's these memories in my head. Like, going in, I knew that I loved certain characters. Mm-hmm. But when the show came on, I wasn't even 10 yet, so I really don't remember it very well.
Oh, yeah. I have a very, very, like, I remember loving it. And if you try to ask me to explain everything that happens with the Dominion, there is a 0% chance I could accurately explain it. But I just remember being like, this is great, man. I'm not going to sleep. And there's crazy alien stuff going on. And this spaceship's great. And the bartender looks like my favorite basketball player. So this is perfect.
Who's your favorite basketball player?
Reggie Miller. He has huge ears. Huge ears.
But what I like about Deep Space Nine, which is funny because it's the thing that I'm getting annoyed with later stuff, is that it came right on the heels of Next Generation, which is after the original series,
right.
And both of them were very focused on, because it was Roddenberry's thing. Both of those were Roddenberry created shows, and his whole idea was that we were going to reach this point where like money and disease and like petty relationships don't matter to humanity anymore because we've evolved so much.
Right.
And like clearly with TNG, a lot of that stuff wasn't true. Like you had weird relationship stuff, like, and the fact that they were ignoring it made it awkward. There were all these rules that didn't quite work. So like Deep Space Nine, I think what I like about it is that it looks at the Federation and its ideals from an outside perspective. And so it's questioning a lot of those things. Like Roddenberry thought that we'd all be like polyamorous in the future, which I feel like was more of a creepy old man thing from him.
Yeah.
So like that was the whole thing with like Riker and Troy was like, it never quite worked because his ideas of how that stuff would work were always weird.
Yeah.
And then in Deep Space Nine, you had people who were like actively questioning those things and saying like, no, things don't quite work out so easily as saying that like humans don't have these problems anymore.
Right.
But as it gets into the later stuff, it's like everything is, a grim problem.
Yes.
So it's less fun to me. Also, and this is a Star Trek aside, I'm basically done with any Star Trek that looks backwards instead of forwards.
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, it is kind of contradictory to the whole idea.
Yeah, if I've watched one episode of Discovery, they watched the intro, and I was like, I don't care.
Yeah.
But I'm excited for the Picard show because that's, it's what's happening next.
Right. I have not watched or really read much about Discovery. And so is it taking place in the past, or where does it take place?
It's in the past. It's between Enterprise and the original series.
Yeah, it is. That is a fascinating move, considering the fact that the whole premise is really like a progression. Like it's about moving forward and like discovering new things. And they're like, how about let's go to the past? I'm like, I don't know. I have an affinity for a lot of the varieties of Star Trek, and I appreciate them for what they are. But I totally agree with you on that. Like moving forward seems to make sense, and I'm very excited for the Picard stuff. I'm
also just I hate stuff that keeps going back to fill in the gaps. I don't need the gaps filled in.
Right.
That's not interesting to me to say like, well, how did he get that shirt? Like I don't care. Like. Does it matter? That
is a very assassination thing to do, because it's like a character I really loved in the first issue is Fernando, and I love that you instantaneously know everything you need to know about him basically within the first 4 panels of his existence. And it's fantastic. It's like you can really, it's like I don't need to know how he became so good at being an assassin, but I can tell that he is based off of the reaction of him walking into the room. It's fantastic.
Right, yeah, like I don't need stuff to like spoon feed me everything.
Right.
I'd rather it just happen.
Yeah. Well, I've brought this up in the podcast before, but it's like in Pulp Fiction, it's like the briefcase with like the golden light coming out of it. It's like everyone always wants to know what that is. I'm like, why would you want to know what that is? There is no way what was in that case is as interesting as what they did with it. Like if they actually showed you what it is, we'd be like, well, this is stupid. We'll just argue about it on the internet.
Yeah, I mean, knowing what's in there doesn't matter. It doesn't affect the story at all. It would just be a distraction to the story.
Totally. All right, so I just have 2 more questions. This is your first big creator-owned book. I have to ask, like, the creating part of the comics is roughly the same. What's the most exhausting part about it, or like maybe like surprising part? And interviews is totally a reasonable answer.
um, I'm not sure. I feel like the process hasn't changed too much.
Right.
Um, I guess one thing that's nice is like when you're working on your own thing as opposed to something that someone else owns, you don't have to explain as much about what you want to do.
Sure. Yeah.
There's so like, that's actually an easier thing. That
Mm-hmm.
doesn't answer your question at all. Um,
I mean, but it is interesting though, because it's like, I guess you don't really think about that necessarily as a reader. You just kind of read it and you're just like, oh, this is what it was always meant to be. But then when you're working on something that somebody else owns, there's like always decision makers above that have to say, yes, you can have Galactus and Squirrel Girl have a conversation on the moon. We're not using Galactus in that way right now, so he's totally fine to use in that way. Or maybe you can't because he's currently Lifebringer, a golden like Lifebringer instead of Eater, Devourer of Worlds. So it's like there's that element versus, you know, with Assassination where you can do what you want. You can kill whoever you want because they're your characters.
yeah, it's much more freeform in that way.
Mm-hmm.
In a way where you don't have to worry about any of that stuff, which is nice.
And is there nothing like what about the production side? Is that like pretty much the same, or are you not really involved with that, or?
It's much the same because this is Skybound and not Image.
Okay, yeah, yeah,
I mean, it is Image, but it's Skybound, which operates differently.
yeah. They have a more of a rigorous infrastructure over top.
Yeah. So actually, it is kind of largely the same.
Except for you can kill whoever you want, which is great.
Right, you can kill whoever you want. You don't have to like ask permission to do stories.
Yeah. Well, last question also involves promotion. I saw that you're doing 4 signings on the day of release of the first issue in Boston.
Not the day of release; it's the 30th.
Oh, it's the 30th. Are you?
Because on the day of release, I will be at a Boston Art Educators Conference. That night, I fly out to Emerald City Comic Con.
Ah.
Following Wednesday, I'll be signing at Midtown Comics, and then I leave for C2E2. And then I'll do the 4 signings.
This actually further underlines my point. Are you trying to kill yourself? What are you doing? That's so much.
I don't know. But to be fair, Boston is not a huge city, so I think I should be able to make it from place to place. And I actually know all these stores personally.
Okay, that's good.
Like, I know all the owners by name.
Mm-hmm.
So it's actually like it was really easy to like set it up. Yeah, it's fine.
Okay. No, when I saw that, I was just like, wow, that is, because it's like 4 signings over something like a 7 or 8 hour period. And I was just like, I don't know. It reminds me of the Parks and Rec episode 99 meetings where you didn't realize what you've done. And then you're like, oh my God, I have 4 signings to do. What am I doing?
Yeah, it shouldn't be too bad because like signings themselves aren't that difficult.
Sure.
They all have cutoff points,
Mm-hmm.
and I'll basically be going from like one group of friends to the next when it comes to like the people who run the stores.
That's awesome. That's great. Well, Erica, that is all I have for you. Thank you so much for coming on, and I am very excited for everyone to get into Assassination #1 and beyond. It is a fantastic book, and you should order it today if it is still Monday the 18th? 18th.
Yes.
But thank you for coming on.
Well, yeah, no problem.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of Off Panel with artist Erica Henderson. You can find her on Twitter at Erica Fails and her work in the upcoming Assassination #1, which arrives March 13th. If you're a fan of Off Panel, make sure to check it out on Patreon. If you back the show on there, you not only support it, but you get early access to each week's podcast, access to exclusive written and audio content, and more. Also, don't forget to subscribe to Off Panel on iTunes or Stitcher and give this show a rating or review while you're at it. You can find Off Panel on social media by liking it on Facebook at /sketched, that's SKTCHD, following it on Twitter at @sketchcomic, or following me at @slicefriedgold. Big thanks to all my existing patrons, including Wesley Gift, Sean Kirkham, Harry Small, Alistair Ross, Julio Anta, Greg Peterson, Gus, Andrew Scott, Brett A. Schmidt, Jason Goodmanson, Johan Brander, Paul Reinwan, Karna Farner, Vita Ayala, JDC and Matt Gagnon, Aditya Bidikar, Tara Ferguson, Dave Slusher, Kieran Mark Antonio, WMQ Comics, Akil, Greg Lockhart, Kokachi, Phil White, Ben Becker, Sean Pinello, Ken Heidelman, Philip Sevi, Al Ewing, Ryan Alcock, Nick Michelin, David Kelly, Robert Wilson IV, Nick Paletto, Owen McCready, Brendan Fletcher, Gary Maloney, Jonathan Nielsen, Matthew Groom, Jason Nassy, Adam Bogert, Xavier Files, Maria Schweitzer, Matthew Taylor, Tyler Turner, Nick Patera, Jacob Sorelli, Ford Gilmore, David Baraldi, Evan Blazer, Brian McRae, Ira James Udaskin, Modern Magic Stories, Nick Hall, Brita Batista, Bobby Ankes, Bjorn Basin, John Hendricks, Steve Anderson, Phil Nall, Ian Maxfield, Cliff Chang, Benjamin Shipper, Colin McMahon, Chris Palmer, Maxwell Schmidt, Scott McGovern, Nathan Fairbairn, Kat McKenzie, Lou Avino, Nicholas Kesslake, Greg Rucka, Adam Heifeld, Nicholas Gardner, Andrew Corrigan, Fiona Staples, Chris Morris, Chris O'Halloran, Mark Abnett, Mike Murphy, Michael Shirley, Tom Barnett, Jim DiMonacos, Norbert, Nick Lowe, James Kaplan, and Mission Comics and Art in San Francisco. You guys are all the best. A quick thanks to the band Wolfpack, whose excellent track Outro from their album Volmilch opens the show. Give them a listen as they're totally rad. Thanks for listening, and tune in next week for another episode.